A huge number of adults are walking around sleep deprived. In fact, studies suggest around 20 to 30% of people are chronically not getting enough sleep. So if you feel like you're always tired, you're not definitely alone. And here's the interesting thing. For a lot of us, the problem isn't just how much we're sleeping, it's actually about what we believe about sleep. Because there are a bunch of really common sleep myths that sound helpful but are actually making us more tired. Before we get into this, think of one thing you've tried to improve your sleep because there's a good chance it's actually making things worse. And honestly, even with all the research, it gets confusing very quickly. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Dr. Ali, a family medicine resident doctor. So in this video, I want to break down the 7 sleep myths that might be ruining your energy and what the science actually says instead. Myth number 1, you can catch up on sleep over the weekend. A lot of people think if they don't sleep enough during the week, they can just make up for it on Saturday or Sunday, but that's not how it actually works. There's something called insufficient sleep syndrome. Basically, you're running on too little sleep during the week and trying to compensate later on. Around 20 to 30% of adults fall into this pattern. The problem is that this pattern actually means chronic sleep deprivation, not recovery. For most adults, you should be getting about 7 hours of sleep every night consistently, not 5 hours on weekdays and then 10 hours on the weekend. Sleep isn't a debt you can just pay off later on. Myth number 2. As long as you get enough hours, sleep quality doesn't matter. This one's huge and very wrong. Research shows that how you feel about your sleep can actually predict how tired you will be the next day, sometimes even more than how long you slept. In fact, one study found that sleep quality predicted daily fatigue better than the total sleep time when comparing different people. It's not just about hours. If your sleep feels bad, your day probably will too. Myth number 3. Sleep hygiene alone will fix insomnia. You've probably heard the advice, go to bed at the same time, avoid screens, cut caffeine, and yes, those things do help, but on their own, they're not usually enough. In fact, official sleep guidelines actually recommend against sleep hygiene as the only treatment for chronic insomnia. Some guidelines even warn it can backfire because if it doesn't work, people start thinking nothing will. The most effective treatment actually is something what we call CBTI, which stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia. Myth number 4. Napping is always good for fatigue. Naps can help in some cases, like if you are a shift worker, but they're not always your friend. If you struggle with insomnia, napping can actually make things worse by messing up your sleep pattern even more. That's why CBTI actually tells people to avoid daytime naps completely. Myth number 5. If you're tired, you must have a sleep disorder. It sounds logical, but it's not that simple. Fatigue and sleep aren't always directly linked. For example, people with chronic fatigue syndrome often report terrible sleep, but their actual sleep measurements can look normal. Also, your thoughts matter. Worrying about sleep or sleep constantly focusing on fatigue can actually make you feel more tired. And don't forget, lots of medical conditions can cause fatigue as well, even if your sleep is fine. Myth number 6. Spending more time in bed means better sleep. This one feels like it should be true, but it's actually the opposite. One of the most common effective insomnia treatments literally reduces the amount of time you spend in bed. It's called sleep restriction therapy, and it works by matching your time in bed to the time you're actually asleep. This builds up your body's natural sleep drive. You're also told to not only go to bed when you're actually sleepy and to get up if you can't sleep. Myth number 7. Sleep problems are purely biological. Sleep isn't just a physical problem, but it's psychological or it's mental as well. Your belief about sleep and how much you focus on being tired can strongly affect how you feel. That's why cognitive therapy is so effective. It helps you challenge unhelpful thoughts about sleep and reframe them. So, what actually causes chronic tiredness? The most common cause is simple: not getting enough sleep, which obviously affects up to 30% of adults. But there are other big ones too, such as sleep apnea, circadian rhythm issues, especially for people who are shift workers, restless legs, and various other medical conditions. In fact, sleep apnea is one of the most common causes of excessive daytime sleepiness, even after sleep deprivation. And what actually works, you may ask? The most effective treatment are evidence-based, like CBTI for insomnia, treating sleep apnea like using a CPAP machine, or light therapy, or even melatonin for body clock issues, addressing underlying mental health or other medical conditions. And here's a powerful statistic: losing about 20% of body weight can also reduce sleep apnea severity by around 50%. So if you're constantly tired, it's probably not just one simple fix, and definitely not just sleep more on weekends. So subscribe. Bye.